Welcome to the South Carolina Lead, and this week in South Carolina, our crossover episode with our live studio audience here in Columbia for our 50th anniversary celebration of South Carolina Public Radio. Joining me with this wonderful crowd is Meg Kennard and Jeffrey Collins with the Associated Press. We're here to talk a lot about politics, the state assembly, and what's going on in Columbia. So Jeffrey, without further ado, let's just jump into the legislative session. Obviously, we're taping this on May 6th. We're going to time travel a bit with this TV episode because the session will play out this week. This will air later on Friday evening. But tell us what we can expect in this final week of the session, Jeffrey. It sounds like abortion's coming back up. We saw that bill die in the Senate. How's it going to play out in the House at this point?
We'll see how my prediction skills work.
Please.
So abortion will probably, if not dominate, it'll certainly be a key thing that happens. And you know, you kind of have to read the tea leaves a little bit. They've already, it looks like that bill that passed the Senate earlier this year, the heartbeat bill, you know, the one that bans abortion from the time cardiac activity can be detected. It sounds like the House is at least going to take that up because a total ban or near total ban that the House wanted to have is not going to work.
Yeah.
So at this point, you know, it looks like that Senate bill will end up in committee, probably get passed out of the House committees and end up on the House floor. The key is, do the House members change it in any way? Because if they change it in any way, then the Senate's going to have to approve. And depending on the changes that get made, you know, the Senate's margin was razor thin to pass it in the first place. So if any changes get made that the three women who are Republicans or the two men who are Republicans who have opposed the total ban don't like, the votes may not be there to pass it. So next week it'll be interesting to see how all that plays out. I suspect that's part of the reason that next week is not the last week of the session.
I know it's really hard to talk backwards and forwards at the same time, but Jeffrey, why didn't this just happen sooner in the session, right? We saw the Senate debate that 6-week ban that you were talking, the near total ban that we're talking about. They passed their 6-week ban earlier in session, but why wait to this last minute? Was it to prove a point? Was it to build pressure? What's going on here?
Well, as long as we're traveling back in time, let's
Yes.
go back a few years to where the heartbeat ban originally got passed before the Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade. So when the Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade, a lot of people in South Carolina, a lot of Republican leadership in South Carolina felt like they could pass a near total ban. If, you know, well, that's the next step. But, you know, things happened after that ruling. I mean, people, the appetite to totally ban abortion suddenly wasn't there as much as people thought. And so, you know, the House leadership, which is a little more conservative, wants that total ban. But the Senate, they can't get the votes for it. And so it became a game of chicken this year, essentially. You know, the House passed its near total ban, the Senate passed its 6-week ban, and waiting for one side or the other to blink. And what's happened over the last 6 months is, you know, more stricter abortion laws have been passed in Florida, which I believe is a heartbeat. North Carolina is 10 to 12 weeks. It looks like that's going to pass through their legislature. So suddenly South Carolina is at somewhere between 20 and 22-week ban, and we're definitely an outlier in the Southeast. And you know, we're typically not at that point in the South. We're typically one of the more conservative states in the Southeast. So that's been one of, and that's kind of finally pushing this towards a resolution. I think is the Republican leadership in the Senate, in the governor's mansion, in the House, they don't want another, you know, 6 to 9 months of that kind of 22-week ban. So I think there will be a resolution. We'll just have to see how it works out.
But again, if they don't pass that bill at the end of session this week, like we're talking about looking ahead, then they can't come back unless the governor calls them back, because that's not going to be in the sine die resolution, which stipulates what they can do in the off season.
Right, and that's another thing that's going to happen this year that hadn't happened in a long time. They aren't passing a sine die resolution, which the sine die is kind of like the blueprint for what they can talk about when the regular session's over. Typically, they'll put a few things in there, like we're going to talk about this one issue and about the budget. But if there's not a sine die passed, which, like I said, hasn't happened this century in South Carolina, then the governor is the only one that can call him back. And when he calls him back, it's wide open to anything. So, you know, if you read the tea leaves and kind of look at things, it sounds like they don't have enough time next week to finish abortion and some other things. So I suspect you'll see the governor call them back into session. And in fact, almost like a tie football game. We'll have overtime. That next week we'll come back in. It'll probably be fairly regular, like a regular week. They'll deal with abortion if they can or whatever other things they have. And then maybe there's some budget things that get dealt with. But it sounds like they're going to wrap up their work by the end of the month. But we'll have that extra time. So Thursday is not the end of the session.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah.
But Jeffrey, let's talk about some things that have happened. We saw the governor sign the Education Scholarship Trust Fund or voucher bill into law this past week. Tell us about that. That was a long time coming, a big win for Republicans in the state. What does that bill do? What does that law do, I should say, and who does it benefit?
What the bill does is it allows public money to be spent on private school tuition, on books, on technology, things like that. And it's capped at eventually at 15,000 students. It'll start off at 5,000, and there's also an income level that that you get to. In other words, if you make too much, you can't get to it. Eventually, though, the income level will go up to about $120,000. But this will allow, in 3 years, 15,000 students across the state to go to private schools, and then if it works, you'll probably see it expanded. This has been something Republicans have wanted for a long time. Mark Sanford ran on it in 2002. The first bill that we were talking to some Republican leaders, they remember 2004 being the first bill that was introduced. There's been 3 governors since then. There's been 4 House speakers, 5 education superintendents. So it took a while, but ultimately they finally were able to get it passed this year, and that, I think, will be counted. Republicans certainly will count that as one of their biggest wins.
Yeah, and especially for Ellen Weaver, the new superintendent of education, that's a big win for her too. But we saw that bill die last year too. It was surprising. So what kind of had to get worked out for that to become, I guess, get to the governor's desk this year? Yeah,
that was a very big surprise. One of the biggest surprises of last year. But I just think in the end there was some worry about accountability, whether or not that there needed to be testing done, that the students that were getting these vouchers, should they be tested, and things of that nature. And it was one of those deals where sometimes in South Carolina legislation, it just needs like a little tweak, and maybe one more year gives people a little impetus to it. I did note that it originally passed the House. The Senate changed it some, but the House didn't change it because I didn't think they didn't want to send it back to the Senate to give it any chance. I mean, that's another South Carolina thing. A lot of times, sometimes you take 80% of what you want or 70% of what you want just because you don't want to end up in the same place again.
Yeah, good getting in the way of the perfect, or perfect getting in the way of the good.
Yes.
Sticking with teachers, sticking with education, we did see that teacher paid time leave was also a big bill moving. Is that going to the governor's desk yet? I know it just got through the Senate. It's kind of
it should. I think they made this minor change, but there's every indication it's passing, almost unanimously, if not unanimously. So yes, it will probably get on the governor's desk, but certainly before the end of the month.
And that's 6 weeks for teachers if they adopt or if they have a child. Just parental time off.
Right, and it fits a little odd loophole they had because state employees got that last year. They passed that for all state employees, but teachers are a different group. They're state employees, but they're considered different. So they had to come back around, and the 6 weeks is one of the longest amounts of leave time in the Southeast. So it is an impressive win for state employees and teachers.
And then when we talk about the budget, we're talking about teachers, we're talking about pay raises too. What's the budget looking like right now, Jeffrey? The Senate got it through, sent it back to the House. Any big changes there? Anything that people should maybe be paying attention to with what's going on? Because we have so much money. We're about to get, I think, more money announced from state economists as well.
Like sacks of money. I mean, it's just, it's amazing for somebody who sat through the recession in 2008 and budgets that were barely in the single digits of billions. I mean, this year's budget is 12, 13, depending on how you want to look at it, about $13 billion. One of the big things, state raises for all state employees. They've been trying to catch up salaries for teachers and state employees that didn't get raises when times were a little more lean over the past decade. So that was a big one. Honestly, they're kind of both in the same place. I mean, the one biggest difference I saw is the Senate didn't include money for roads and bridges that the House and the governor wanted. Yeah. But that being said, there's going to be a meeting of the folks that predict how much money South Carolina gets, and that's on Tuesday. And chances are there will be another 9-figure addition to the budget. I mean, hundreds of millions of dollars. Yeah. And so those few things that didn't get into the budget, suddenly they may be able to get in there. So, it's been a very mild budget fight compared to other years. And in fact, I'm not, everyone around the State House is saying don't expect a lot of vetoes from the governor even. I think everybody's very happy, which, if you have a lot of money, it's easy to be. It doesn't buy happiness, but it can rent it,
It can buy you a boat.
Yeah.
But kind of along that line, Jeffrey, too, just talk about some bills that didn't really go anywhere that you thought maybe were going to go somewhere, i.e. medical marijuana. I mean, that was supposed to be a big one this year for Tom Davis. It got through the Senate last year, died in the House last year, was set to rock and roll through the Senate this year, and then all of a sudden, dies.
That was a surprise. I mean, because medical marijuana, last year, it looked like it was coming to a vote in the House. It passed the Senate, and it looked like it was coming to a vote in the House, and they had a procedural rule that I won't bore everybody by going into the great details, but essentially the Speaker of the House at the time, Speaker Pro Tem Tommy Pope, ruled that it was out of order, and so that killed the bill last year. So we all kind of figured it would be one of those things that gets into the same position this year, but no, I mean, the Senate had an opportunity to place it in a spot where they could debate it fairly immediately, and they didn't. And take it out of committee and put it prominent. So that was kind of a surprise, and I think everybody's still kind of scrambling to figure out exactly what's going on. Tom Davis has done a lot of work on other bills. He's the chief sponsor and been fighting for medical marijuana for going on a decade now. So I wouldn't be surprised if sometime in this upcoming week they do something to help out Tom's bill. The other thing, another bill that I won't say I'm surprised, but it's ended up in the same spot as the hate crimes bill. You know, South Carolina and Wyoming are the only states in the union that don't have a bill specifically making hate crimes, enhancing penalties when you commit a crime, an assault, something like that, based on hatred of someone's race, age, sexual orientation, those kind of things. And once again, the bill has gotten to the same place it's gotten before. It passes the more conservative House, but it ends up, and then it gets through the Senate committees, but it's sat on the floor. And that's been something that's caused a lot of friction in the Senate between Democrats and Republicans. It's really, like I said, it's one of those undercurrent kind of things, but there's a lot of anger that it hasn't come on the Democratic side, that hadn't even come up for a vote yet, that it's sat on the Senate floor for basically 2 years now and nothing.
Jeffrey, that goes back to the Senate having that ability to block bills and then just use them as bargaining chips too, which is what we're seeing a lot of this week especially. Yes,
you know, there's this procedure called putting your name on a bill, where you put an objection on a bill, and unless they're able to get it into, like, do some legislative maneuvering, get it into what they call special order status or things like that, that when someone puts an objection on the bill, it's just very difficult to bring up. And so Democrats did put a bunch of objections on bills last week. That kind of forces them into bargaining situations. Maybe, okay, we'll hear this bill if you'll take your name on it. And it's not just Democrats that do that. The hate crime bill is several Republicans that put their name on it. And it happens all the time. That's one of those legislative things, you know?
And then when we talk about penalty enhancements for hate crimes, we're also talking about some other penalty enhancements when it comes to bond reform. That was a big push for Republicans too to get done. Is that going to make it across the finish line too before session ends?
Yes, both the House and the Senate have passed their own versions of the bond bill. There's differences, like one key difference is the House bill and the one that the governor supports would allow somebody that commits a violent crime while they're on bail to have 5 years added to their sentence. Where the Senate took that out, and the Senate's problem was, well, that may or may not be constitutional. The constitutional question is, okay, so I was in jail for an assault, and then I committed a crime, another assault while then on bond, but I get found not guilty of the first one. Can I get 5 years for something I was never found guilty of in the first place? So that's why the Senate took that out. Now, again, the governor last week was pretty adamant. He wants some kind of enhanced punishment. So the couple of lawmakers from the House and a couple of lawmakers of the Senate will come together in a conference committee and negotiate that out. I think that happens. It's everyone wants it, and it's one Henry McMaster, the governor, has been pushing for it hard. So I think that one you'll see.
And Jeffrey, before we jump to Meg really quick, I want to ask you about just some gun reform legislation too that might go through. And we're talking about making sure that felons can't carry weapons in the state. What's going on with all those bills at this point?
Well, that was another thing that the governor last week was very adamant about, that he wants a bill passed in some way, somehow, however it works, that it would allow someone, if a felon's in possession of a gun, which is illegal, then they would get an extra sentence in state court. It's a federal law, but sometimes it's hard to kick things into federal court if there's not necessarily a place to be. It just would be easier, like a one-stop shop, right? Like if you have a felon who has a gun, sticks up a convenience store, well, you don't have to push that into federal court. You just have that all done in the state court. The other, and I think that will probably end up happening. It's just a matter, there's probably been a lot of texting and talk over the weekend about how they're going to figure that out, but I think that's going to end up happening. The other interesting gun issue is constitutional carry, is what they call it, where basically anyone that could legally have a gun could carry it anytime, anywhere they wanted, as long as it was allowed. I mean, you can't carry it like in a grocery store or places that prohibit it, but you could carry it anywhere. I've been told, that bill is right now stuck in a Senate subcommittee. It passed the House. I've been told there will at least be some efforts to try to pull that thing up some way, somehow, because there's a lot of Republicans that want that to happen. South Carolina a few years ago passed the open carry, but you had to have a concealed weapons permit. So, there's some people that are like, well, I think we're okay there, but no, I think there will be a big push. Now, if it passes, that's more of a coin flip, I think.
And again, if things don't pass this week, they're still alive till next year, 2-year session. That's when things get really fun because it's an election year for everyone too. So
yes. Next year, 2024, everything stays alive until then. So
it's a big election year, isn't it, Meg Kennard? Right?
Oh my goodness, just a little bit.
Yeah. So Meg, tell us a little about your role at the AP. Obviously, Jeffrey covers the State House primarily, but you also cover South Carolina. You used to cover more of it, but now you're part of the Washington bureau. Kind of give people an idea about your role at the AP?
Sure, yeah, fortunately for me, I still get to stay living here in South Carolina, working in South Carolina, but I work for Washington for our national political unit, our national politics team. So my focus, especially this year and next year, is the presidential race. All the candidates who are coming here to campaign, kind of keeping tabs on what's going on both with the Democrats and the Republicans leading into 2024. But I get to do all of that for national coverage, but still being here in South Carolina, where I've been with the AP and also been living for 18 years. So I feel like, it kind of gives me a good perspective while I'm covering national politics. I'm based out here, and what I like to say, I get to live in the real world, but still cover politics. So I think that adds richness to our coverage, especially when it deals with politicians and issues pertinent to South Carolina. But yeah, that's what I'm doing.
Can you tell us who's going to win the race?
Well, we're about to have our big meeting to decide, so I'll make sure to fill you all in.
Speaking of that, Meg, we've been bouncing around the state. It's really nice. We get to travel together. We get to see the different places of the state and hear from these candidates face to face. Big news was this past week when we were down in Charleston hearing from Senator Tim Scott, who made no bones about it that he'll be jumping in the race later this month.
Well, he just said he's going to have a special announcement.
Big major announcement,
Yes.
which could be any number of things.
Indeed.
But it's nice when they give us a heads up,
Yeah,
right?
it is nice. Not just surprise.
So kind of tell us how you think that's going to affect the race. I was talking to Nikki Haley the other day on This Week in South Carolina, trying to pin her down about how that's going to affect her candidacy, because again, so similar in so many ways. How do you see this shaping up?
It is really interesting to have covered as many cycles as we all have. I think this is my 5th cycle or 6th, I don't know. I've been covering presidential politics since 2004, but to be in an early state, obviously there's a lot of importance on South Carolina. We're the first primary in the South for Republicans. We're the first primary in the country now for Democrats. So there's a lot of interest here anyway, but now on top of that, we have 2 homegrown candidates who have both been in statewide elected office in South Carolina, have been reelected multiple times at that level, and are also longtime allies and have considered each other friends at certain points in the past, have drawn on the same donor base, supporter base, even used the same consultants for a time. So now to have both Tim Scott and Nikki Haley in the race for the GOP presidential nomination, that's an unprecedented event, certainly for me as a political reporter, but I think all of us here in South Carolina, we can't help but watch it closely.
So it's going to be a lot going on in
It's
South
just gonna be a
Carolina,
lot.
right? Yeah. And
Yeah.
like we have seen that division, right? We've seen like staffers, for example. We've seen, like you're talking about, donors. So it is interesting to see that play out because money is obviously key to this and going the distance, and Tim has plenty of it. We saw the governor raise a good bit of money, but you got to keep raising money to keep going the distance to make it to February of 2024.
Absolutely. Money is key. And, there's obviously, when you're a candidate at any level, particularly these presidential candidates that we're watching, they're getting out to a lot of states that might not know them as well as South Carolina, certainly spending time in Iowa and New Hampshire and the other places that factor in early ways in the nominating calendar. But even within here in South Carolina, there's a huge competition for those donor dollars. And frankly, to be able to make those trips out to other parts of the country, to keep that campaign mechanism going, you have to have the money. But then it's circular because you also have to be able to show your donors that you're a good bet, and so they should keep giving you money so you can keep making those trips. And when you've been drawing on, in large part, a very similar pool of donors, that's tough, particularly for these 2 South Carolina candidates.
Meg, we were talking about Nikki Haley and her responses to a lot of different topics, but abortion's been a big one, obviously. We were just talking about it. I mean, we're seeing it play out in South Carolina. It's interesting that we are a state, we don't have a very strong abortion law in some respects for folks who don't think that we do. She signed that 20-week bill that law into law when she was in here. So why was she so kind of hard to pin down? You saw the interview I did with her. I was trying to hear, do you want a 6-week ban? Do you want a near total ban? Is it okay where we are right now? It's hard to pin them down. Why is that, in your opinion?
It's tough. I mean, abortion is certainly, there are many issues that are going to play into this primary in large roles, but abortion is the moment right now. That's just kind of the issue dating back to the Dobbs decision from the Supreme Court last year, but certainly within the GOP primary, all the candidates are kind of being asked to put down a marker and show, okay, where are you on this position? Where do you think that the deadlines or any of the rules of the road, so to speak, should be? And even particularly for Nikki Haley, who had this big abortion policy speech that she was going to give a couple of weeks ago, and she did, and she gave it at a major anti-abortion group's headquarters in Washington. She didn't lay down those markers. She didn't lay down those deadlines. She talked about the need for a national consensus on the issue, which sounds great when you're trying to figure out what's the best path forward on a difficult issue. But in a campaign that's focused a lot on the numbers, the number of weeks, the deadlines, those kinds of things, she didn't really put that marker down in the sand. And from a political policy standpoint, again, I'm just an observer in this process, I'm no expert, but when candidates do kind of set out those concrete deadlines and policy positions, that gives their opponents in the race a pretty specific place to go after them, should they so choose, a point of disagreement. And by not doing that, that does make it a little bit more difficult for other candidates in the race to say, well, I disagree with her. Well, she didn't necessarily say explicitly where she thinks this issue should be. So maybe she bought herself a little bit more time to try to perhaps eventually come to a number. But like you referenced, the governor, when she was governor, did sign, a 20 to 22 week ban, depending on how, you kind of consider the issue. In terms of other states that are putting through far more restrictive policies lately, that's, a pretty generous timeline. So, we don't really know where she is personally, if she's changed from, back when she was governor with 20 weeks.
We have about 5 minutes left. Megan, I want to talk about some other candidates race. We were originally going to have this open house back in January, but it was the same day as President Trump making his announcement, his big swing through South Carolina. And we were both there too, but we haven't seen the former president back in South Carolina since. Why is that, do you think? He's making rounds other places, but is it just he doesn't feel like he needs to? I mean, he's leading the polls in so many places, including South Carolina. Yeah,
former President Trump really has maintained high popularity here since he was in office, and certainly when he ran 2 times before. So he may be looking at South Carolina as a place where he does have a lot of support, and he knows it. He's got the governor already vocally supporting him, as well as Senator Lindsey Graham and several members of the congressional delegation. So, he may, it's not like he's just saying, oh yeah, that's in my win column, I know it, but, perhaps focusing on some other areas between now and then. And honestly, he may be letting Nikki Haley and Tim Scott and potentially Ron DeSantis also kind of, compete for whatever tier you would consider that of the candidate level at this point. And then, I'm sure we'll see him back before too long.
Yeah, because we also did see Florida Governor Ron DeSantis up in the upstate in Spartanburg a couple of days ago. Pretty big turnout there too. What's your read on that situation and his reception so far? I mean, he has not declared yet, but it's anticipated that he will pretty soon. Yeah. What was your take when we saw that crowd?
There were certainly a lot of people who I think are very curious. They've been waiting to see how this campaign shakes out. We're still very early, even though we've been saying that for months, and it was very early then, and it's still early now. But I think there's a high level of curiosity when it comes to Ron DeSantis and what kind of candidacy he could put forward. We have seen some members of the legislature saying that they're willing to be behind him should he eventually announce the campaign that we're all presuming is getting ready to happen. But especially in a state like South Carolina with 2 homegrown candidates as well as former President Donald Trump being very popular, it's kind of a waiting game. And people, frankly, are telling us they really want to hear more from Ron DeSantis. They're glad he made that trip and he came to South Carolina and did a couple of events, but they really expect to see candidates more since this is an early primary state, and so they're wanting to see more commitment from him to spend the time here.
We haven't seen too many barbs being thrown at either of them yet. I mean, we saw Nikki Haley kind of saying that stuff about Disney and Florida and like kind of wading into it too, and then the supporters of DeSantis kind of jumping on that too. Can we expect to see more of that? I mean, they're already starting to run these ads against each other.
Oh, I think absolutely. I mean, like I said, I've covered many cycles before, and in 2016 we saw this in very large part, not just with then candidate Donald Trump and the other candidates, but a lot of those kind of second-tier candidates kind of arguing among themselves. Here, we've seen that already happening a lot, especially with Governor Haley's PAC, her Political Action Committee, going after Governor DeSantis and a lot of the Disney moves. A lot of that's coming from her, but it's also coming from her PAC, and that's kind of the role that we see these political committees kind of playing out. So yeah, we're definitely going to see more of it for sure.
And when you talk to folks, like we were up in, when we saw Nikki Haley and Greer the other day, like what's the vibe there? I mean, obviously, we're, again, talking about Tim Scott, I'm just so confused about this lane that they're both going to be in, how people are going to differentiate between them. What do you see being the deciding factors between those two, in your opinion, from what you've seen?
I mean, I think there are a variety of things. I think there are some people who would probably say they want to see someone running for president who has executive experience, and as a governor, clearly that's something that she does have, that he doesn't. You know, he also hasn't been on the international stage. I mean, he's a senator, and so he plays a role in foreign policy, but he's been focused a lot on banking and some other economic development issues.
Yeah.
And so depending on kind of where you see maybe those two things factoring together, but you know, Senator Scott has said that, you know, if he's putting on a campaign, it's going to be positive, that he's going to be focusing on the good that he sees that he could bring to this race, and not kind of going after the other candidates and his competitors. And that could be a vibe that people are looking for, and frankly, maybe hungry for after the 2016 cycle and the 2020 cycle in a divisive world of politics. If people are looking for somebody with a positive message, maybe he's more their guy.
We all gotta stay positive.
I mean, you know, I cover politics full time, so like it's hard.
It's interesting, yeah, right there. Like everyone's happy and nice right now, but we're gonna see it all.
Oh,
right,
yes.
guys. So Meg, with about 30 seconds, what are you looking for? What should we be watching for in the next couple months leading up to 2024?
I think we're going to see more candidates getting in, and we're going to see the candidates as they all kind of like congeal together in the race, kind of figuring out where their lanes and who's going to be going after whom on what issue. You know, abortion is clearly going to continue to come up, and so that's going to, you know, more people are going to be putting their markers down and trying to parse through that. But then depending on what's happening with the economy and the debate over the debt ceiling, that's something that candidates are certainly going to be asked to, you know, weigh in on. And well, how would you handle this if you were president? That's real world economic politics that affects everybody, and so we're certainly going to be hearing candidates on that.
A lot to look forward to. So luckily we have people to do that for us. Jeffrey Collins, Meg Kennard with AP. Thank you guys so much.
Absolutely. Thank you.
We're good. Okay. Usually we don't have to have like such a time crunch, but for the TV show we had to do a hard 26. So I'm like, wrap
You
it
don't
up.
talk that fast.
Wrap it up.
25:30, okay?
25:30. Okay,
Yeah,
we have an extra 30 seconds to
Do we
spare.
get a gold
5:30.
star?
Meg's good at talking like that.
You got it.
But
You did
now
great.
the fun part of the show.
Okay, yeah.
I'm going to do my improv. But I do want to say thank you to everyone for being here, but let's open this up for the wind down. We're going to do our little wind down.
Correct,
Listen to the podcast.
yes.
It's our little break from the news, even though sometimes we talk about the news. It's like the most podcast part of our podcast, if you will.
We put it at the end so you don't have to listen to it.
I'm looking forward to it.
And this is when AT gets to shine too. So without further ado, welcome to the wind down section. Like I said, our little break from the news.
Oh, yes.
AT Shire, our live taping with this great audience.
Oh,
we need
what a
them all
crowd.
the time. You should see me on Mondays and Fridays. I'm always like this.
The best
always
crowds are in
excited.
Colombia. You know what I mean? Yeah.
So let's throw out a controversial topic, AT.
So,
what do you have for us?
Let's explain this here a little bit. So at the wind down, I sort of just, I'm an intolerant man.
Yes, contrarian, some would say.
Lactose intolerant at all, you know. And so I have some hot takes. Meg understands. I'm a strange person. And so to get down here, we normally talk about something that Gavin and I really just want to just shoot the breeze, you know what I mean?
Yes.
And so a topic we've been on recently has been ChatGPT.
Oh, God. I thought you were going to say sandwiches, and I was like, not now.
I was not. I'm avoiding sandwiches here. But so I asked ChatGPT, what's a funny hot take to talk to a live audience about? And it comes off the rails a little bit. So I'm going to read it to you, okay?
Not ready for prime time.
Combining humor with a hot take can be a great way to engage your audience and get them thinking. That's good.
Yeah.
Here are a few ideas for funny hot takes that you could talk to a live audience about.
Okay, let me take notes.
1, dogs are smarter than cats.
Ooh.
Argue that dogs are not just man's best friend, but also smarter than cats, and provide examples to support your claim. I can't get down with that. I'm a certified cat guy,
Yeah,
which
that's
just
true.
means
Yeah.
means I like cats and dogs. And so number 2, pineapples belong on pizza.
Yes.
Oh.
I will support that. I see a lot of shaking heads, a lot of...
I can't. I think
is
that is.
trash.
I think that's sacrilege. Thank you, Meg.
No one's making you eat the pizza.
Okay, and now
Then
it
the
gets.
pineapple's ruined because it's hot.
It's so wet. Okay. Anyway, number 3, and this is where it gets weird. The Earth is flat. Present the absurd argument that the Earth is actually flat, and use humor to poke fun at conspiracy theories surrounding this topic. I'm not interested in that. I'm more interested in this next one. Cereal is soup.
The food hot takes are always the most controversial.
They're disgusting. But anyway, that's sort of what we're looking at. And I was more on the idea that, so the coronation was today. Gavin was
Yes.
coronated earlier.
Yes, I flew back.
We
were not going to postpone the open house again.
We didn't want to burden everyone here with that.
I'm still on London time.
Yeah, Gavin's been on London time for a while. So I'm not a Prince Charles guy, King Charles. Okay.
Thank you.
So I thought we should name our favorite kings, pop culture, any other king or royalty otherwise. So Gavin,
Okay.
who's your favorite royal?
I said Queen Elizabeth, but Kate Blanchett.
Kate Blanchett, yes. I love that. Meg, who do you think?
So wait,
It can be real. It can be fake.
I have a clarification.
It can be
so
Captain
this is
Crunch.
like any royalty, like I mean, just
It could be Mustafa. You know what I mean?
It can be Crown Royal.
Okay.
It could be Crown Royal.
Prince.
Prince?
Oh,
That's a good answer. That's a very good answer.
Johnny on the spot.
Yeah.
Jeffrey,
good.
Had it
Jeffrey,
locked
who's your
loaded.
favorite royal?
I was going to go with the Sun King, Louis XIV, right?
Louis XIV.
That's good. I love
Oh, I thought you were
Louis.
talking about Raw.
Well, that works too. But yeah.
Don't want to offend him.
I obviously am going with King Elisar Aragorn from Lord of the Rings. That's obvious and very easy.
That's the obvious answer.
Anyway, we can open it up to the crowd if anyone has anything that they would want to talk about. Amy has a microphone here. Let's see her lurch under this. So if anyone has anything, raise your hands. Amy will come find you
we
in
can
the audience.
talk about things obviously not related to
Oh, it can
royalty
be
or the wind-up. If you
absolutely
have questions
anything.
about like the legislature or the campaign trail.
We can also just talk about Prince. That
Yes.
would be
talk about
fine.
Prince.
I mean, Raspberry Beret. Come on.
Please.
The movie.
Cereal with super?
So do we have any questions? Hands?
Make her walk.
I also appreciate everyone being respectful during the taping and no one heckling during the live taping.
I wanted more heckling, you
Put
know?
the socks on. Why isn't he wearing socks?
I might put some heckles in.
Yes, go ahead, caller.
I did save my heckles, so thank you. The first one's really kind of for Meg. It seems with recent events, the economy's going to go from, and I don't mean debt ceiling economy, I mean the actual economy. It's going to go from more behind the scenes to a front and center issue. By the time the election happens, do you think there's somebody who has an advantage if that is the top topic, even though all the horses aren't out of the barn? And the question is two parts and slightly less serious. I'm just wondering how the lead is, physically, mentally, emotionally preparing for the release of Fast 10 on May 19th. So I'd like to see what you guys plan
There'll
for
be no
that.
comment about
Two
Fast
parts.
and the
Two
Furious.
parts.
Take it away, Meg.
Yeah, the first part of that, for sure. I think you're absolutely right. I mean, like I referenced when we were doing the earlier piece, it's always the issues about the economy are the ones that voters tell us they're really most concerned about. You go to an event and you're like, okay, so what do you think about this person or that person? And maybe they'll, mention a few other things, but oftentimes it always comes back to how am I going to do better? How's my family going to do better? How's my job secure and all this? I think that, in some ways there could be people who look at like Senator Tim Scott's candidacy with his position on the Senate Banking Committee. Mm-hmm. And he really has a front row seat to a lot of these issues as they get debated. I mean, all of these senators, we have like 2 Twitter accounts from them, right? Like he has Vote Tim Scott, and this is not a plug, this is just a fact. Like that's his political Twitter account. But then he also has Senator Tim Scott. And we have to follow both of them, and I'm getting all the political tweets over here, but over here it's like a lot of like reminders of what he's doing on the Senate Banking Committee, like all the time, and like YouTube notifications and everything else I get. So, I mean, I'm not, pushing for anybody as a candidate, but certainly he is one who, is, as we speak right now in the Senate, working on a lot of those financial issues. And, there could be, if he leverages some of that with voters, that could be a way that he tries to appeal to them.
Then I can also see Nikki Haley constantly talking about, saving the economy in South Carolina back from the recession, growing the economy, all that.
Should I say the phrase?
Please.
Beast of the Southeast. She says it a lot in terms of, and she's like, I didn't say it.
One
but they
magazine
said it.
article.
One magazine article.
They
but
love
it
the
is-
media when they say things like that.
It's in every stump speech reminding people of all the jobs that, she kind of presided over as governor coming to South Carolina. So,
and you
she
can see
does make that.
probably Trump doing the same thing too. So.
Oh, certainly. I mean, and he has, his position formerly as president.
Yeah.
He could talk about all the good economic things that he did, and his argument would be kind of bringing the economy back after the Obama presidency. I mean, he would make a lot of those arguments too.
No Fast and the Furious take.
Meg likes Hobbs and Shaw, so
Yeah.
I do.
she
That's
liked it. Gavin just has a problem with it, and that's his own hang-up. And I'm going to let him have it. Anyway, do we have any more questions out there? Anything. It could be absolutely anything. You have access to these great reporters here.
Oh, God.
Oh, hello.
Hi, long-time listener, first-time caller.
Yeah, we can't see you. We can't.
Who is that?
we remember the
Who
house
is that
lights?
voice? Who is that voice?
Hi, my name is Vance Claw Lugo.
Okay, we thought you were somebody else.
Okay, yeah. This voice sounded short.
Curious, are you guys going to retract any of your defamatory statements about Vince Cole Lugo and liking candy corn?
I don't
Lead
see
law at this
I don't
point.
see any problem. It's in the scrolls at this point. I don't see any problem with it. Vince, okay, let's get some backstory here, okay?
Yeah,
So
go ahead.
Vince will eat anything, and
We have that in common.
Gavin and Vince
Put out
have that in
food,
common.
Feedback.
We just, yeah.
And
I don't care.
I
Pineapple on pizza. Case in
Ugh,
point.
disgusting. But I am of the opinion that candy corn falls under the umbrella of anything. And he is staunchly against it. But I think if you just put it across from his office every day for a week, he would eat all that candy corn. And I'm going to double down. You can serve me papers, Vince. I'm not backing down off this.
Candy corn is basically just like flavored plastic, right?
It's I don't know
microplastic.
if it's flavor, but it is microplastics, yes.
Any more questions? Go ahead.
Anything. Oh, we got one up front.
This is not a question, more of a comment, going back to the dove and the cat. And since Megan brought up the concept of, she brought up Prince, so I have to say, you broke the dove's heart when doves cry.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any more questions? I have a question.
there we go, back there.
Okay. I have one for Jeffrey when we run dry, when the hopper's out. Okay.
This is real life hopper rate.
This is real life.
803-563-769.
Hi, I just wanted to ask if you have any thoughts about what's going to happen with the debt ceiling. Are they going to let the clock run out and not do anything again and put us all in bad shape?
Yeah, I mean, I asked Nikki Haley about that, and she didn't really give me a clear answer. But I mean, I can't imagine them going for it. I mean, that's just it's inconceivable.
Unfortunately,
essentially.
yeah, we see
because
this
so
all the
much is
time.
at stake. The economy's at stake.
Yeah.
Your retirement's at stake. The stock market. I mean, people are going to be making calls and be like, "Hey, cut it out. Let's just pass a clean bill at this point."
Yeah.
Talk about budget cuts later because you can't hold the whole world economy hostage.
Yeah, I mean, and oftentimes, I hate to sound like a cynic, but I am a political journalist. In Washington, we see these deadlines come up, and it's like everyone freaks out, and there's weeks and weeks of consternation, and oh my gosh, hair on fire, what are we going to do? But then ultimately, something does get passed and brokered at the 11th hour. And that's unfortunate because there was so much energy expended, during the worrying period. I don't hope that we get to that ultimate, really down to the wire deadline, but I do hope something gets passed. And it's tough when you look at the politics of Congress right now because, there's been a lot of talk of Speaker Kevin McCarthy, who, as we all may remember, if you're nerds like me, took 15 votes for him to get voted into the speakership. And so that was kind of like not a great way to start. And then, now it's like, hi guys, like, can you get your people together so they can get this bill? And that's kind of an uncomfortable position for him to be in. But then there's also the argument of folks who look at, the Republican consternation about being able to get a bill out. Well, we're under a Democrat in the White House, and so if things do tend to fall apart, and unfortunately the economy does, go into a bad situation, that's a Democratic president's problem, and we're in an election cycle, and so potentially maybe that could be spun to be bad for the Democratic incumbent. Again, that's all a whole bunch of layers of what if and pessimism, frankly, and I would hope no one actually really would feel that way, but I mean, the argument's out there. I feel like, we'll get down to the wire and something will happen, but it really could be down to the very last minute.
Yeah, with this. The economy and the stock market watching every second of it too.
And our parents watching their,
Yes.
daily dose of financial television freak out, for sure.
I got a question for Jeffrey. Yes. Every year we have you on talking about session, and every year you have like a sleeper pick for something that's going to come out. So we're halfway through this 2-year session. What do you see what sleeper thing is coming out of this second year of session?
Give me a second to think about this. Let's see. So what would be the issue that will
The man with like the encyclopedic South Carolina
Exactly.
legislative
Exactly.
brain.
Yeah, I think in the end, I think that you know what I think will get some traction, and I think she'll work really hard on is Katrina Shealy and her idea that South Carolina should pay for school lunches for everyone. I think she's working really hard on that, and I just have a feeling that that's going to be something that comes about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Mark
a
it
great
down.
pick. I mean, you've been right almost every single time, and so I love that you're calling this one. I
Told you
like
they
that.
already know what the news is.
Oh yeah,
This is all shot.
spoiler alert. We
Don't
do.
tell AT
make-
about the meeting.
I have my own camera, okay, Jeffrey. So I'm an important guy now.
We've given you too much power.
I'm drunk with power.
Do we have any more questions?
Anything else?
Any lead lore you want?
Yeah, we
discussed?
have. I brought all the scrolls.
As reporters, constantly I see a reporter asking a politician a question. The politician would dance around the answer. After a while, it's like, what was the question?
Yeah.
As a reporter, hold those politicians' feet under the fire. They're here to represent us,
Yeah.
not their party, not their friends, but us. Please,
Yeah.
start asking them those tough questions since they want to get in the fire and demand answers.
Yeah, I mean, I,
Agreed.
again, tried to pin down Nikki Haley on a couple times and just kept
You
moving around it, but
have 3 of the best
But I think
reporters
that's the
in
thing
state
too. Is
here.
like you also get to see them not answer the question too. So maybe someone who does answer the question, you can at least give them some support there. Of like, oh,
Yeah.
if that person's gonna answer the question, okay, like
it's
makes more sense.
it's nearly as informative as
Yeah.
someone answering the question, not answering the question.
But I agree. Like yes, because
Yeah.
you also see some people interview folks, and it's just like throwing up a topic, and
Right,
here's a
and just,
response.
you know,
It's like no, you need to hold them
It's not-
accountable.
It's not a real interview if it's just like a spew of talking points, which is great, but like I can get that if I'm just like a supporter listening to your stump speech or going to your website to get your whatever. Like, no, you're absolutely right. I want to hear your take right now on whatever this issue is, because if you're asking people for their vote, if you're asking people for their support, their money, all those things, I mean, that's accountability journalism, is asking, okay, great, you want all those things, well, how do you feel about this? You know, what are you contributing to this debate? And it is very frustrating to be talking to public officials of any variety, of any level, or candidates who are seeking to be a public official and have them just blatantly not answer questions. That is beyond frustrating. It's probably one of the most frustrating pieces of our jobs. So thank you for your support, and I promise we will continue to ask those questions.
Well, and sometimes I think it's important, like they said, sometimes it's when they don't answer the questions, it says something. Like somebody said about jazz, sometimes it's the silence between the notes that makes it interesting. And sometimes, for example, in the last month or so, I wanted to ask Henry McMaster, the governor, about his position on hate crimes and why he feels that way. And he's been asked that a bunch of different times in a bunch of different ways, and he has a very standard pat answer. But sometimes as a reporter, you have to ask the question in a way that forces someone out of their comfort zone. And what I did with the governor was I said, Governor, you're a former prosecutor. As a former prosecutor, would you have wanted a hate crimes law as a tool that you could have used to prosecute criminals? And it took him a minute. He had to think through the answer and give an answer that made sense to my question as opposed to something he's always used to doing. And so as a reporter, I agree with you completely. It's pushing people out of their comfort zone. It's not asking, what do you think about abortion, but maybe instead asking them, well, asking the question that along the lines of, well, what would you say to a woman who has an ectopic pregnancy? I mean, sometimes it's pushing people out of their comfort zone is what we need to
And
do.
in that circumstance, sometimes we're met with the immediate answer of, well, I don't deal in hypotheticals.
Yeah.
But like so much of this is like, well, if you were president, if you're candidate for president, that's inherently a hypothetical situation. So like
Yeah.
you should be able to go there, but we get that a lot too.
I'd like to know what you think about the hythetical before I give you the job, How many of us have been interviewed for a job?
Hypothetical.
Ask that question.
Yeah.
A lot of this is reminding me about how Gavin pivoted away from Fast and Furious earlier
See that?
when Dave asked his question.
Well, when you
Hold them accountable, folks.
when you deal with these folks, you pick up some of the tricks. I guess.
I thought this was about family, Gavin, okay?
Okay, that's all the time we have.
Exactly.
It's so wonderful. But we are getting to that hour. But do we have any more questions, or we have plenty of time too? We can take photos. We can talk afterwards as well.
Wrap it. We
got
got one more question. We got a question here.
Sorry, Renee. I know I'm going in all of your thoughts.
Hi, I just wanted to find out about a specific issue that's dear to me, and since I work in the nonprofit sector, and that's about women's health. South Carolina ranks very low in terms of maternal, infant, and women's health issues, particularly in deaths when it comes to women giving birth or women surviving the birth of their child. Infants in South Carolina, as a nation, as a part of the country, we're very low in that. And when it comes to the United States, we're very low in terms of women, maternal, and infant health issues. And I'm just curious as to whether or not any legislative issues are coming up in terms of women, children, and health issues.
That's been one of the things that surprised me a little bit about this session is because there was a lot of talk when Roe versus Wade was overturned about, yes, we're going to try to get this close to total abortion ban, but on the other side, we're going to do good things for the children and the people that are here right now. Hasn't been a lot of talk about that, honestly, in 2023. I mentioned Katrina Shealy and her lunch bill, which in a way would improve children's lives across the board. Part of the thing in South Carolina is, you know, in the 21st century, we've had a time in South Carolina where there were no women in the state Senate, where there are 46 male state senators. And, you know, South Carolina's 51 to 52% women. I mean, that's incredible. I mean, the governor every day puts a little easel outside, a picture of the women who have been lawmakers. The fact that you can fit that even boggles my mind, you know? I mean, when you think about there's 170 people in the legislature at any one time, the fact that you could fit all the women that have ever served up there is kind of mind-boggling. So if there's anything that's going to change that, I think it's getting a state that looks more and more the way South Carolina looks. I mean, they're obviously outside of white men, everybody's kind of underrepresented as far as, you know, genders and as far as races and certainly if you want to get into religion and all those other factors. And so, I mean, part of it is, I think if we can figure out a way to make to elect the people that look more like the state in general, then that will change the way that what the agenda is at the State House.
And we good? Victoria, do you have a question? You have to say who you're engaged to.
Yes.
Sean Birch.
Just producer Sean Birch.
Producer Sean.
Producer Sean.
Last question here.
You mentioned Senator Davis's medical marijuana bill, so I was just curious, like, do you have a sense of why that's been blocked in the past and what the future for that bill might be?
I think in general, it's one of the key people that are against it is law enforcement. And that carries a lot of weight with the opponents of it. I mean, I think if law enforcement gave their tactic approval to it, then they would be able to pass it. I think that's the biggest thing against it. Right now, I'm not sure exactly. This year is an interesting case. I figured it would come out fairly easily out of the Senate, so I'm not sure. And it's being politics, it could be any number of things. People know Tom Davis wants it really bad, so there may be a couple of senators that are wanting to horse trade with him. You know, they want to get him to do this in order to get that. I mean, it could be something as simple as that. Tom Davis is so determined, I don't bet against him. I wouldn't bet against him on this at some point, and the world is changing too. So I still think that AT may be the 2024 thing too. That may end up being what they deal with right at the beginning. But yeah, I think the key to it, if they want to get past it, is law enforcement. I think that's the thing that catches it up, that it kind of holds it up the most right now.
That was my most compelling audio from the well on the floor of the State House this year.
I mean, you basically saw Tom Davis like pretty much break.
Yeah.
Like, this man's been trying for this, like you said, almost a decade to get this done, and it's like, you tell me I don't have the votes now. So.
Yeah, and he's like, what else do you want from me?
Well,
Like,
what else can I give?
And literally, what else can I give you?
Well, that's all we have for this portion. I want to say thank you to everyone. We're going to have Kobe Hennessy from the ETV Endowment come up here and say a couple words too, but thank you all for being here. Thanks to the Associated Press and ETV and Public Radio. Kobe!
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 Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. My name is Kobe Cartwright Hennessy, and I've always said for many years that I have the absolute best job on the face of this earth because I get to serve as the executive director of the ETV Endowment. However, I also think that Gavin, Amy, and AT have pretty cool jobs too, and they could say the same. So I just want y'all to join me again in giving these folks and all the folks at ETV and South Carolina Public Radio, and especially Jeffrey and Meg for serving as our guests tonight, another round of applause. They are fabulous. You all have made tonight so much fun, and as Stephanie said, we've had a great time celebrating South Carolina Public Radio's 50th anniversary. And none of what we do here as far as programming goes is possible without the financial contributions of ETV Endowment members. So to our members here in the room, thank you so much. You all make all of this possible. And we don't say that lightly. It is the truth. So as a reminder, be sure to be listening to SC LEDE on Tuesday to hear yourself clap and laugh, right? And make sure you follow the podcast so you don't ever miss an episode. And if you are a podcast fan, I hope that you have been following South Carolina Public Radio's newest podcast, which is Indebted. Yep. You may have met Scott tonight. It is on South Carolina's debt, its impact and consequences, and it just wrapped its first season with 8 episodes. So be listening to that one as well. So thank you again for joining us. Thank you for your support. We hope that you have safe travels home, and happy listening. Thank you.